Hello and welcome to The Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's movie is The Omen, the 1976 supernatural horror that stars Gregory Peck as an American ambassador to Britain who, after a series of strange deaths and the ominous warnings of a priest, comes to realize the horrifying reality that his adopted son is the Antichrist. A huge hit that rode the wave of 1970 satanic and occult-themed cinema. The Omen has gone on to be a fixture in pop culture with the character of Damien replicated and parodied in numerous films and TV shows. Joining me today to talk about The Omen is Mike Schiff, a producer and filmmaker whose 2021 documentary, The History of Metal and Horror, explores the intersection between heavy metal music and horror movies. Mike's latest project is Through Static and Shadows, a YouTube series that merges the mystique of psychic phenomena and the raw energy of heavy metal and horror culture. Led by psychic medium and clairvoyant Catherine Nadal, the show offers an intimate and unfiltered look into the lives and afterlives of some of the genre's most recognizable figures. All links to everything Mike, including Through Static and Shadows and the history of metal and horror, will be in the show notes. I do encourage everyone to check out Mike's work, especially Through Static and Shadows, which is incredibly fascinating stuff. Here, latest episode with Don Jameson for people out there who are a big fan of that metal show when it was around. Don is a fixture there. He's a fixture throughout all of the heavy metal and comedy communities as well. He's the latest guest. I think this is episode number three. And so I really encourage everyone to check that out. Again, show notes. Link in the show notes below. And Mike, I thank you so very much for joining me today to talk all things to Omen. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you again.
It's great to talk to you again as well. I think it was 2021 when History of Metal and Horror came out, and that's when we talked about your
Mhm.
documentary. And now you're on through here with Through Static and Shadows. I'm really curious, how does this kind of come about? Where did you get the idea to merge kind of like the whole thing about psychic phenomena, having your guests being heavy metal guests, sometimes even speaking to the spirits of those kind of rock legends, heavy metal legends that have gone on? How did that kind of come about from your part?
So it actually came about through the documentary because last year AC Slade, he's a guitarist from the Misfits, Joan Jett, Murder Dolls. He opened up his own coffee shop in Boonton, New Jersey. That's actually the location where the original Toxic Avenger was filmed. I found out after the fact, which was kind of cool.
Mm.
And it's pretty cool that we actually got to get Lloyd Kaufman to come in for an episode as well. But basically what happened was AC and I had met at a place called Punk Rock Flea Market, which was like kind of a horror punk convention in New Jersey. And I was telling my documentary, and we got to talking over there, and I gave him a copy. He contacted me probably a couple months later and said, "Hey, love the doc. We'd love to screen it over at my coffee shop. Would you want to come over and do like a panel Q&A and all that stuff?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I went over there, and we had like a little panel. I was there with Rob Caggiano from Anthrax, and we kind of just talked about. We watched the film. We talked about metal and horror in general, and so afterwards, Rob had introduced me to Catherine Nadal, who's a psychic, and I was always very fascinated by psychics. I was mostly a skeptic, but also very open-minded about all that. I just kind of needed enough proof to believe in, particular psychics, not just like all of them all together, because there are a lot that aren't legit.
Mm.
So it was through there that I met Kathy, and her and I kind of exchanged information. She was very supportive of what I was doing. She loved my film. She introduced me to a lot of her friends in the business, and I had her over to the house, and she did a reading for me, which was great. And after that, I was, kind of started brainstorming again, like, okay, I'm really into the psychic stuff. I'm, of course, into metal and horror. Is there a connection, between these three things? Because I really want to continue on with like a heavy metal and horror type thing. So I started thinking about, okay, well, what can I do? Maybe we could do psychic readings for heavy metal and horror artists, specifically because most psychic shows kind of focus around housewives, who want to communicate with their parents who passed away, and some celebrities, have had shows with psychics doing readings for them. So it's all all kind of the same stuff. So I wanted to do something a little bit different and gear it more towards the heavy metal and horror world. So Kathy and I started talking about that, and AC was, of course, excited about it as well. And we set up the first two episodes with him and Don Jameson over at his coffee shop. And so those were the first two episodes to kind of test it out, see how it worked, kind of learn from that. And they were great. The ratings were awesome. And then I kind of went on from there with three more episodes. So that's sort of the history of how it all started.
So right now, Don Jameson's the latest guest there. Which other guests who people can expect to see in future episodes?
So the first episode was with my friend Fred Bogle, who is big in the underground, the horror underground. He directed the August Underground series, which is kind of like, like a found footage horror series, which is very, very popular in the underground scene. It's listed as like one of the top 10 or 20 most disturbing films of all time. So he does a lot of convention appearances, and he's got a really big following. Him and his company Toe Tag, which have been around for years. So him and I have been really good friends for a long time. So he was the first episode. So I actually went out to Pittsburgh to shoot that at the Horror Realm convention. I was trying to get, a couple of more people there, and I ended up also getting Felissa Rose, who's famous for Sleepaway Camp. So I got an episode with her, and I already had AC's episode and Don's episode, done already. I ran into Lloyd Kaufman at a local horror convention here on Long Island, and I approached him and told him about the idea. He loved it. He was very supportive. So then we ended up getting an episode with him as well. So he's in the fifth episode, and we're kind of leaving it at that. See how well the series does. If there's a good following for it, if people are into it, if people want to put money behind it, which would be the most important thing for us, then we can continue on with the series and keep producing more episodes.
Well, it's a really fascinating project you put together here. And I really like the intersections that you really do between all of these different kind of worlds and genres and kind of put them all together. And for everyone out there, if you haven't seen Through Static and Shadows, I really recommend you check out the episodes that are out there so far. Again, link in the show notes. Check it out, talk about it. Word of mouth is always really big on shows, new shows like this. We've got such a packed kind of world out there of all type of content. Excuse me. So it's great to see something like this that could really kind of break through, give you something really kind of entertaining, but also kind of like unique as well. So I think it's really great work from you, Mike, for all the stuff you've done here.
Thank you.
Let's move on from one series of spooky things to another. The Omen,
Yeah.
1976. We recently had the anniversary of this film. It was last week, I think it was, what would that be, 50 years, I think, since the movie came out. Excuse me. And this is a really interesting film, Mike, for me, because it seems to me that I knew of The Omen even before I watched The Omen, because The Omen has been so entrenched in pop culture in so many ways, even in like the way people can sometimes talk to each other. Like, just say, I don't know, someone's kid is just being a little shit or something. You say, oh, you're just a little Damien, kind of like that. Like it
Hmm.
becomes part of the lexicon. It seems to me I always knew what Damien Omen. It's funny, people say his name's Damien Omen. It's not Damien Omen, it's a Damien, but people say Damien Omen because that's what's comes up. So I didn't see the film until much later in my life. I think I was in my early 20s, but I knew of the film beforehand. And I've seen little drips and drabs sometimes. I remember specifically one time I was too young, switched it around on TV, and the scene with the nanny where she jumps off the roof. Yeah, too young to see that, so that kind of freaked me out. And then afterwards, you just kind of watch little bits and pieces, and then I eventually watched it when I was in my, I think early to mid 20s, and it was a movie that was kind of really fascinating to me because here we have a star like Gregory Peck, this really established kind of classic star. And here you have subject matter, which in the 70s was just kind of rife. Like a lot of people were exploring kind of the, all things satanic and occult and all that. And the clash of them two both kind of coming together was a really kind of interesting thing to watch. To me, the movie in itself, while a lot of the moments in the film are really kind of unique and just kind of like moments that are just in drenched and so influential in the history of horror movies. I think the film as a whole doesn't quite work as well as maybe it did in the 70s. I think maybe since then, there's other films that maybe kind of tapped into the same stuff and maybe did a little better. But it still works as an effective work of kind of pop culture, kind of horror art. And I think a lot of that has to do with Jerry Goldsmith's kind of score as well. That's just fantastic stuff there. What about yourself, Mike? Do you remember the first time you came across the Omen and your first kind of impressions of it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the exact moment, but I know it came out a year after I was born, so I was definitely too young to see it when it was
Mm.
released. But and I think it was what was it, June 6th, 1976 or something like that. Like they
Oh,
try
right
to,
there. Sick, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I remember seeing it when I was a kid. I was definitely too young for it, but I was too young for pretty much all the movies that I saw because I was the horror fiend very, very
Right.
early on. And it was one of those movies that was just on TV, fairly often. And I would just watch it. My dad loved it. He was a huge horror fan, so he introduced me to a lot of stuff. And I guess he felt I was ready enough to kind of watch the stuff. So he didn't kick me out of the room. We just watched it together. But I was, I would definitely, it was a very eerie and kind of disturbing film, even though I was really young and didn't really understand, what was happening. Like I was into it, but it even to this day, it still creeps me out. There's something, especially with those old 70s films, like there's something just very, I kind of love that dated look, and sound. And yeah, like it doesn't kind of, I don't like to say it doesn't hold up, but compared to modern films that are much more polished, it's a whole different, type of thing. But there was just something so just eerie about it. And we could talk about the sequels as well, because I mean the second one also just was pretty intense for me. And I loved it a lot, almost as much as the first one. But yeah, I mean, it was just thinking about the scenes later, like when they go to the cemetery scene is one of my favorite parts. And of course, spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't seen it, which of course you should have, basically they go to the cemetery and they find out that Damien was born of a jackal, which
Mm.
was something that really hadn't been done for before. And that's such a like old school satanic, type of theme. And it freaked me out. And also then when you see that his biological son was actually murdered, and they open up the tomb, and there's a baby skeleton with his head bashed in, I mean, that is just that just really kind of freaked me out. And that's so disturbing, especially, because you take something so innocent as just a newborn child, and just imagine that, at that, at the moment of birth, they snuck the baby away, smashed it with a hammer or something, killed it, and then swapped the baby out with Damien. I mean, that is such a dark premise. That moment always stuck with me. I mean, along with all the other things that happened in the film, which were pretty amazing, but that had a big impact to me for a long time.
So, from all the research that I did, The Exorcist pretty much set the tone for like a lot of these kind of films that'll follow because people think, newer generations and such might approach The Exorcist and think of it just some like what they call the scariest movie of all time. People kind of forget how much of a big blockbuster it was. That movie made hundreds of millions of dollars. Like people lined up around, street corners to watch it and such. And I imagine some of the appeal will be some of the freak factor, the whole reports about people fainting and such, and like people like, ooh, I want to go see this. So, as it is in Hollywood, when one blockbuster does well, that thing has to be replicated again and again. And so it came to we have with The Omen. So it comes down to this bloke named Harvey Bernhard, who was a producer. And so the story is, when it comes to the conception of this movie, he was sitting down with a religious friend and they're talking about the Bible and they talked about revelations and such. And then he was like, this might be a good idea. What if, there was you know, a, a child was born and he was the Antichrist? But not only that, but what if he was born in influence? A lot of people would think, if someone was going to be that kind of thing, how would you gain control of the world? You'll do it through politics, you'll do it through business, you'll do it for all that kind of stuff. So the story is that like as soon as this idea popped in his head, he ran home and he typed up a treatment and such, and he put it all together. And I think it's really kind of interesting, isn't it? Because you had Rosemary's Baby, I think that was 68 or 69. You have Exorcist 73. The whole concept of children being involved in kind of like as being vessels of evil is a, such a was a, such a thing for the 70s there, and I think the Omen really just took it to its zenith. You know, the whole idea about the Antichrist being born in modern days and such, and become, as we see in the sequels, becoming such an influential figure within politics and business and everything else. I thought it was just absolutely kind of like it's a fascinating idea. It's a great idea. If I was that guy in that position, I'd run home and write up a treatment in 1 hour as well. But it's a pretty cool idea, don't you think, to have kind of like not only have a child be the most, ultimate incarnate of evil on Earth, but also to be already born within an environment of a ambassador to the UK and all the kind of influence and stuff that comes with it. I think it's a fantastic idea to come up with.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, whenever you introduce a child into that kind of situation, it's always very unsettling because children, you always think of them as, as just innocent beings, who just can't be evil in any way. And now you just kind of, flip it upside down, and the evil is, either in the child or is the child itself in the case of Damien. And you can see just the evil growing, from film to film, and the power growing, and everything. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think once Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist came out, they started to see that there's sort of like a theme here of the devil and Satan and stuff like that, this there was a craving for that type of theme. And I know that originally The Omen was, when they were kind of putting it together, they thought it was just going to be like a B movie that wasn't really going to
Mm.
go anywhere. They didn't think it was a huge deal, but then they really started thinking about it more, like, I think we really have something here. So then they started getting the bigger stars, Gregory Peck, and then of course you know, the whole entire production just got bigger and bigger, with bigger names and bigger production quality. So it turned into a much bigger film than they really expected it to be when they started. And of course, it ended up being one of the greatest horror films of all time that I think most people would agree with. Um, so yeah, it's interesting how, you think something's going to be small and then it just grows into something massive and will be remembered, I think, for most of human history when it comes to films.
The original title, there was two original titles. The first one was The Antichrist, and then it changed over to Birthmark in reference to the 666 kind of birthmark thing. So this producer, Harvey Bernhard, he brings on a screenwriter named David Seltzer. He did some uncredited work on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And so he was kind of like a new writer. He brought him in, and this guy was especially influenced by Rosemary's Baby and kind of like, did a script for it. They took the script to Warner Brothers, and Warner it was just sat on the shelf there, and it was about to go in turnaround. So at this time, Harvey Bernhard was kind of like desperate to try to get this going, and he was looking around for directors. And Richard Donner was someone that he knew, and so he gave the script to Richard Donner, who we'll talk about soon as well, because he's just such a remarkable, diverse career of films that he has here. So according to Donner, he gets this script through through a friend of his who was over at Warner Brothers named Eddie Rosen. He picks it up, he reads it, and he's like, "This is fantastic." And coincidentally, that night, he's having dinner with Alan Ladd Jr., who was the big executive over at 20th Century Fox. And it was at that dinner that he convinced Alan Ladd Jr. to take on the script. So he's like, "We got to do this film. This is fantastic." So it moves from Warner Brothers, goes to 20th Century Fox. The thing about Richard Donner that he wanted to do with this movie, and I think the ultimate kind of like thing that makes this movie so work the way that it does, the original script was a little more fantastical. It had covens and witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. And Richard Donner was like, "I want to get rid of all of that stuff." He wants it to be more real. He wants to be based more in the real world. He wants the nuances to be smaller. He wants the mystery to kind of unravel as we're watching the thing. He doesn't want a full on kind of like those kind of B grade kind of like satanic films that they had. He doesn't want hammer horror. He doesn't want that stuff. He wants something a little more kind of gritty. This is the 1970s, that's what he's looking for. It's a thing that works really well. I think that's something that works with this film is that throughout the whole movie, you know something's wrong. You just don't know that it's what it will eventually come to be, even though you have this like crazy priest is giving ominous warnings about revelations and all this kind of stuff. You kind of like leaning into well, maybe, this isn't, maybe the kid's just a little disturbed or what have you, but as all the kind of things start to happen and all the deaths and all the connections kind of come together, and you get to that part, especially with the graveyard scene we are talking about, and everything that you hear about the jackal and everything else comes true, that's when it clicks. And I think it was a really smart decision by Dinah to kind of like just strip away kind of like the more fantastical elements of it, keep it grounded, make it a suspense thriller as opposed to an overall kind of like bing bombast supernatural horror. And that way you really get the audience engaged. I think it was really smart directorial decision making on his part.
Sure. Well, and plus you don't need all that extra stuff. I mean, you don't need the any rituals. You don't need any of the stuff. I mean, it's pretty much you leave it to your imagination of like what happened prior to the start of the film. And you discover stuff later. You discover that Damon was born of a jackal later. You don't have to kind of show all that stuff in the beginning. I think it's more disturbing the way they actually did it. How there's sort of like these revelations throughout the film and it builds itself. It's like, Damien was, put here on Earth and everyone who is responsible, like they know what's going to happen. They unleash this thing on the Earth and it just kind of builds, more and more horrible things happen along the way to protect Damien and ensure that he achieves, adulthood where he can potentially take over the world and create major carnage. So I think just the fact that you're watching all these little things happen with it with the dogs, that are protecting him and
Hmm.
and
The
and
nanny.
and just lightning, the nanny, the lightning hitting the metal spike, on top of the church and just all these, the head decapitation. It's just nature itself is being controlled, by Satan and a lot of people, Satanists, believe that for them, Satan is nature, and so in that sense, it's like, yeah, nature is all around and it's helping Damien kind of, get through life and grow and stuff. So and that's what those are all things that you just pick up watching the films, and you could even see Damien himself doesn't really understand what's happening. I mean, he's gets comfortable with it. He's not totally freaked out, but it's not really until the second film where he kind of understands who he is and what his purpose is and stuff. And
Yep.
that's also very, very interesting. But yeah, it is interesting to see Damien in the first one just kind of going through the motions. He's a kid. He still likes to play, um, ride his tricycle around and all these type of things. But all these things happening in nature around him are orchestrating, all this horrific stuff. It's not even him kind of saying, okay, I want this person dead and that person's in my way. And I can see that person is, these guys are conspiring against me. It's on the other side of the world. And like, it's not that. It's just like there's this evil force that's just all around doing all this stuff. So I find that really fascinating as well.
Richard Donner. It seems to me these days, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, that I know you can talk about actors being typecast. Seems to me these days that directors kind of get typecast more than they used to be as well. If you've done horror, you're only doing horror. If you've done this, if you're a superhero guy, you're only doing superhero films. It's in back, I think, like in the 80s especially, I think there was a more kind of diverse range of what a filmmaker can do. And Richard Donner is a perfect example of that. I mean, you just have to look off the list of films that he's done, like his big movies, right? And it's such a broad kind of like collection. The Omen was his breakthrough movie. Before this film, he did some TV films and shows and such, but The Omen kind of broke through. He follows that up with Superman, essentially laying the framework for the superhero movie moving forward. If The Omen, you could believe that, a child could be the devil, Superman, you believe a man can fly, right? And he does so. He achieves that. Lady Hawk in 85, The Goonies will follow that up as well. Lethal Weapon pretty much creates the buddy action comedy with Shane Black there. Then you have Scrooge, which in my opinion is one of the best kind of like Christmas comedies of all time. He's just got this list of movies that he has, and it's this collection of films. Like I said, it's just so broad. He could go from comedy to action to fantastical to like fantasy and everything else, horror, and the fact that he is able to do this, and yet not many people work when they talk about greatest directors of all time, like just say you're the average punter on the street. Richard Donner doesn't come up, but they kind of don't realize just how much of an influence that he's had in their lives as a filmmaker. I mean, movies like The Omen and Superman and Goonies and such, they are pop culture as they come. They everything about them is has influenced so many different imagery, shows, movies. I mean, it's just when you think about it, it's just kind of like crazy where this guy, who some people might not even realize directed all of these movies, is kind of like the person who's kind of like set the template. I think especially for a generation of 80s kids, moving forward. He set the template for a lot of the ways that they will influence and perceive looking at movies. And I think he's just a fantastic director, and I think it's a shame that he passed away in 2021. I think he could have maybe pulled off some more movies in the future. I don't know, but yeah, I think he's just a fantastic director. What do you think of Richard Donner?
Yeah, I mean, obviously his resume is incredible, and they definitely gave him a shot. I mean, I guess he did some horror stuff, maybe. I mean, not as heavy as The Omen, but he worked on The Twilight Zone and things like that. So he had some sort of like, little bit of horror experience in the background, but I guess they just had enough confidence that he could pull it off. He was just, I think once you really see that a director has skill in directing, um, I don't know what all the inside stuff was, like who knew who and who knew, but what the conversations were. But I think a lot of times when you can see that a director is capable of just directing well, then you put a lot of faith in them and say, oh, well, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to, put this story on screen from the script and everything. And you give him a shot. And then once you do something like Superman, I mean, then it's like, okay, he can do the Omen, he can do the Superman, he can pretty much do anything. We have faith that any kind of film we throw his way, he's going to be able to do.
Mm.
And I think all major directors could do that. I mean, I think I'm sure Spielberg, if he wanted to do, could probably direct some amazing horror, like some real gritty type of horror stuff. I mean, he's kind of dipped his toes into a lot of different fields. So
Poltergeist, yeah.
yeah, I mean, Poltergeist, of course, is like a perfect example. But yeah, I mean anything. Like even if he just wanted to do like an Evil Dead movie, I'm sure he could do something amazing with that, because he's a skilled director and he's not going to mess it up. And that goes for a lot of filmmakers as well. Um, Even with someone like Sam Raimi, I mean, he did the Evil Deads and stuff, and then he ended up doing Superman. I mean, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yeah.
So they were able to see like, oh, so Sam Raimi could do more than just like horror stuff, and like Evil Dead stuff. He could do much bigger things. So he's also a director that I'm sure a lot of the studios have a lot of faith in. So there are probably some directors maybe that they look at. It's like, he's done too many of these kinds of movies, and we're not really going to risk it at this point because his resume is just like, oh, this genre and nothing of anywhere else. But if they see someone like Richard Donner saying, oh, he's done Goonies and Superman and The Omen, and it's like, okay, well, we can give him a shot doing almost anything that he wants to do. So yeah, so he was very fortunate in that sense to have that skill, but also be accepted, by Hollywood to kind of branch out and do different things.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you will love. Let's move on to the cast of this film. The character of Robert Thorne, played by Gregory Peck. And there were some other actors who were considered for the part and even offered the role for this film before they moved forward. There was a 1975 trade article that said that Roy Scheider was considered for the role of Robert Thorne, and that would have been like 1 year before Jaws, but after French Connection. So just in that kind of like rise that he had there in his mid 70s. William Holden turned down the lead role because said he didn't want to do a film about the devil, but funny enough, he will end up starring in the sequel because the first Omen will be so popular. Dick Van Dyke, he actually said in an interview with Larry King in 2000, September of 2000, that he was offered the role, but he turned it down. He said there was a lot of violence, a lot of gore in it, and he just didn't want to do that kind of thing. So then we come to Gregory Peck, and Gregory Peck is really interesting because, of course, he was a big star, did around 30 films up to this point, and it was in Roman Holiday and To Kill a Mockingbird, Cape Fear, all these kind of films, right? At this point, though, he hasn't actually acted in 3 years because he was producing a couple of movies. His star was kind of waning, but he's still Gregory Peck, right? And Richard Donner was like, this is the guy that we need. We need like an established name on the marquee, but also to play this role. I mean, if you're going to be the ambassador to like, the UK, prior to that, the character is a US ambassador to Rome, and he's going to be like a very affluent kind of person and such. You need to have this kind of guy. You need to have a person who's got the whole world pretty much at his fingertips, and then it's going to fall apart around him. And so they managed to bring him in to the movie. And not only that, they managed to bring him in at a fraction of his usual fee. So they pay him $250,000. However, Peck was really smart. He asked for 10% of the film's gross. So as you
Hmm.
can imagine, so this movie, I think it was budgeted like at 2.3 or 3 million or something like that, ends up making like $80 million dollars. So he ends up pocketing the biggest payday of his whole career. And yeah, he does. I think he's just great in this movie because he pulls off what this movie does need, not only the marquee name, but the character of Robert Thorne. You need someone a little kind of, I don't know, he needs to have some stature. You need to have some
Hmm.
gravitas in this role, and I think just that's exactly what he brings to it. And I think it was also, I imagine, there's a certain appeal to see an actor like a Gregory Peck, who might some people might sort of consider maybe old school, kind of like classy Hollywood classic actor, showing up in a 19 mid 1970s kind of like satanic horror movie. There's a certain kind of appeal to that, to the clashing of the both worlds there, and I think he's fantastic in this movie.
Sure. And it's surprising that he actually did it because his son had committed suicide
That's right. Yeah.
that long before they started producing the film. But he just wanted to do the movie anyway. So despite the tragedy that he experienced. But I think wasn't Charlton Heston also up for the role
I
for
think he
him?
was, and he ended up being in another movie later on as well. I forgot what that movie was called, but yeah, I think Charlton Heston also said he didn't want to do anything that was an evil associate. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also I think because his son had died
Oh, really?
around that time, and I think that was his reason for bailing on it, but it was too he just couldn't deal with anything dark at that time. So interesting in that sense because his son died, and then Gregory Peck's son died as well prior to the film. I mean, there's a whole list of things about this film that you can really like dive into, multiple people dying, from like crew dying in the film, planes being hit by lightning. I think like three different planes were hit by lightning. I think Gregory Peck was on one of them. I think they had engine failure on his plane, but they were fine. I think one of the producers, executive producer, his plane got hit by lightning. So it's like a lot of really weird stuff going on. I think the animal trainer got mauled by either a lion or a tiger after doing that whole baboon scene, like the next day or something. So it's like another one of those films where it's like it's a demonic like evil theme too, and really weird and bad stuff happened to a lot of the people involved in the production. So that's like a whole other thing to dive into, like all the things that you didn't know about the Omen.
Catherine Thorne, the character played by Remick in this movie, she's kind of like, oh, it's kind of like Gregory Peck, kind of like more kind of old school kind of Hollywood as well. Did a lot of TV, especially and stage stuff as well. She was living in England at the time, so that's how they kind of like approached her to take on the role. I couldn't find a lot in regards to her talking about the film. There was a interview she did with the New York City Public Library back in, I think, during the time when they were making this movie. That's kind of like, I couldn't listen to it itself, but I could find kind of notes about it. She pretty much said that she really wanted to approach the role of Catherine Thorne not as kind of like a standard kind of horror scream queen kind of thing. She wanted to really explore do a genuine exploration of maternal panic. So essentially, like, what if this child isn't my child, and that's kind of like realization she kind of has throughout the movie, right? Is this kid really my kid? What sort of strange things that are happening? And at the same time, her child is trying to kill her throughout the whole movie. It leads to the infamous scene where she falls from the balcony that Richard Donner does such a great work with as well. You
Hmm.
mentioned before the zoo scene. People don't know there's a moment where she takes her son Damien to the zoo. They're driving around this baboon enclosure where the kind of baboon's going to come out and interact with the car. supposedly she didn't know how to drive that type of car properly. I don't think it was an auto. I think it might have been a stick shift, and she got stuck, and there was some popping from the engines, and it caused the baboon
Hmm.
to go absolutely ape shit. And then she had like so the terror that was on her face in the car is very much real. That's her reacting to the baboons just going crazy all
Yeah.
over her in
Well,
there as well.
and those baboons also got worked up because they had a separate car where they had an alpha male baboon inside of it. And so when all the other baboons around saw that, they freaked out. And they
Mm.
also didn't feed the baboons prior to that. So they were hungry, they were confused. There's an alpha male inside the car. So that they did that intentionally to just get them all riled up. And that's why they were so ferocious in the film.
The 70s, they got away with so much shit back then, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, well, they didn't do everything. They didn't, the Rottweilers in the film, for a lot of the old school films, they would do a lot of really unethical stuff, to
Mm,
get animals to do what they wanted to do. But with the Rottweilers, they said they were very peaceful, docile, calm. They were just like licking the crew. They were very kind. So they didn't need to be cruel to the dogs to get them to be mean in the film, which
yeah.
is great. They were smart about that and ethical about it. But the way they shot the dogs, you know, filmed the dogs, I should say, they were very just clever with the lighting, the shadows, having the dog just come through the shadows and just look menacing. So they didn't have to do anything crazy with that. It's just except for just do really smart filmmaking to make them look more ferocious than they really were.
Now we come to the kind of the title role, I guess. Damien Thorne, Harvey Spencer Stevens plays the role in this movie. So there were 500 child actors actually interviewed for this movie. And he was kind of like one of the lucky few, but at the same time, he won the role during a group audition. And so the what he had to do to kind of get in front of everyone else is the scene, the scene where they're leading to the church and he freaks out. He
Yeah.
has to replicate that scene to Richard Donner. And out of all the kids, he was the one that was the most convincing because he just went all out. He was clawing at Donner's face, he was kicking him in the balls, he was doing everything. And
Mm.
that was enough to win over the part. But there was one little problem. He was a blonde, and they wanted a kid with black hair. So they actually do dye his hair in the movie as well. It's a really interesting movie in that role. In that, do you ever remember him talking much in the film? He seems to be very silent throughout the whole movie. You don't really see much lines of dialogue. It's not like Linda Blair, where she
Hmm.
has all these like long streams of dialogue in the movie and such. That's voiced over later on in the movie. The child in this movie of Damien, I'm sure there's like little bits of little things that he does say, but it doesn't seem to be a very talkative child throughout the whole movie. It's more about the presence, right? And I
Hmm.
think just the way that Harvey Stevens kind of pulled it off here is a really kind of great, kind of one of the great kind of child performances, I think, because just to be still and to win over the audience and creep him out just with the presence itself, just to have the camera kind of linger on the child, look at his face. The eyes, especially, I think eyes are a big kind of thing in this movie. I think it's a really kind of interesting way for him to perform the role, and a really interesting way for Dick Donner to really kind of make the role work as well for the camera.
Yeah, and it seems like Damien in this film is more of an observer than
Mm.
anything. He's growing up, he's experiencing childhood. I mean, he does seem to have some fun. He's playing with toys and riding his bike and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, he doesn't really have a lot of dialogue. You're not really getting to know who he is, like you did with Reagan in The Exorcist, where she's talking a lot in the beginning, and you really kind of get to know her as a character through the things she's talking about and the dreams she's been having and all this kind of stuff. But with Damien, it's just there's so much stuff happening around him, and it just seems like he's just in for the ride. He doesn't need to talk much about his feelings because maybe he doesn't really understand his feelings or anything, but he's observing everything that's going on and he's watching these horrible things happen and he's mostly kind of unfazed and of course triggered by certain things like going by the church and stuff like that and he is emotional and when his when this dad picks him up and takes him to, basically kill him. He's fighting back. He's scared. He's, resisting the whole thing. So he's very emotional in a lot of ways, but also very just kind of docile. And that's, I think, makes the character even scarier because you don't really know what's going on inside of his head. You just see him very quiet most of the time. He's observing. He's, seeing his kid, his friends play and stuff like that. He sees, the woman hang herself, off the building and crash through the window, and all the kids are freaking out, but he's unfazed. So there's something, he doesn't maybe understand why, but he's not triggered by all that kind of stuff. And that's terrifying because automatically you see that there's something's not right, with this kid. Like why is this kid so unfazed by all this horrible stuff happening? And that makes it so much scarier. You just don't need him to really say anything. There's no point to it. It doesn't help move the story along. It doesn't make the character any more interesting. I think they did it perfectly the way it was.
The only part in the movie where he kind of like has a hand in anyone's death is his mum's death, right? With the tricycle hits the
Yeah.
stool. Detroit, by
Hmm.
the way, beats Kubrick by 4 years with kids on tricycles. So I'll
Yeah.
just point that out as well. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting kind of like way to the first time this kid interacts with his own nature.
Hmm.
Outside of like freaking out by going near a church and such like that, of course, is when he does that. And I think that's when
Yeah.
people kind of go, oh, this is kind of like, this is where, this something is really, really wrong with this kid here too, because he'll do
Sure.
that as well.
Because he realizes he doesn't need her. That
Yeah.
she serves no purpose in his life. There's nothing, like, he'll be fine. He'll be taken care of. He
Yeah.
has a nanny. The dad, pays the bills and all this kind of stuff. He doesn't need the mother at all. She serves no purpose for him, except she's sort of like a roadblock. She's causing trouble. She's seeing that there's stuff going on that she doesn't like, and now she's an obstacle. So, he just kind of gets rid of the obstacle. I mean, whether, of course, bumping into her like that was sort of the trigger for it. All the other forces around were kind of orchestrating, a lot of this stuff. So, um, yeah, I think that's sort of an interesting kind of thing to think about too. It's like, okay, all the people who are just obstacles are just eliminated, including the woman who is technically his mother, though not
Mm.
biologically.
No, not at all. Okay, so filming for this movie starts in 20th October 1975. So it was under the name of Birthmark when they actually started filming this movie, which would have been interesting. This movie was released as Birthmark. I don't think it has as much a franchise potential. I can't imagine someone wanting to watch Birthmark Part 2 or anything like that. It was a really good name change to the Omen. So they had
Yeah.
an 11-week principal photography schedule, Shepperton Studios in Surrey, England, additional locations in southern England, Rome, Italy, and Jerusalem. And also, they say that the huge kind of estate that's depicted in the film is actually located in Hereford County in Surrey, England.
Hmm.
And the budget of the film was $2.8 million. So you touched on this already. The whole notion of the curse around the Omen, the different things that are happening around the movie. So I myself and don't really buy into the curse thing. I always go back to what Max von Sydow said about The Exorcist, because supposedly there was a curse on The Exorcist as well. When they asked him, was there a curse? It's like, of course there wasn't. Shit happens on movies all the time, It just depends on how you frame it and how you market it. I always find it to be a bit of a marketing thing. There are some crazy things that do happen on this movie, though. So I think you mentioned before about the airplanes and such. So you have Gregory Peck and the screenwriter Seltzer. They were on planes to England that were struck by lightning, even though their flights were 8 hours apart. Producer Mace Newfield flew to England a week later. His plane was struck by lightning too. In another instance, production was cancelled. A charter flight on a plane which took on new passengers and crashed and killed all on board. So that's another thing right there. It's really kind of crazy. Then you have after the movie came out on Friday the 13th of August 1976, John Richardson, the special effects designer behind The Omen, and he did the scene with the decapitation, right? Scene
Hmm.
with the plate glass window. He was in Holland working on the film A Bridge Too Far, where his BMW crashed. His assistant, Liz Moore, who was in the passenger seat, was cut in half. And supposedly, Richardson crawled out of the car and saw a road sign that said he was 66.6 kilometers away from the town of Omen, Omen. I didn't, I'm not sure if that's 100% true or not, that last part
I've
there.
heard that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course we talked about the whole baboon, but we know
Mm.
what's happened with the baboon sack thing. So again, I'm not a curse guy. I'm not really big on that kind of stuff. Kind of freaky though, don't you think?
It's a little weird. Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure it kind of helps in marketing in a way, but I think most people, of course, would rather none of those horrible things happen to these people. But it is strange when it'll be one thing if one or two strange things happened, during the production or something, but it was just one after the other, and it is weird when that many um you know, tragedies happen, and through a production, that much death and injury and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if there's anything behind it. I mean, I don't know. I'm into the whole psychic thing. Of course, as we mentioned, I do think there's something there. Um, it's sort of in a different kind of way. I think, some people are just the brains are tuned differently and they pick up different signals, from the universe or wherever. But for tragedies like this to happen, I don't really know what that is. I mean, it could absolutely. I mean, if you think about how many productions there have been since the invention of film and
Hmm.
movies and everything like that, eventually one production is probably going to have more tragedies than the others. I mean, there are some that have had, of course, horrible things happen, but it is, of course, gets more attention when multiple things happen on one film. That is, of course, themed, has like this demonic theme to it. Then, of course, people latch on and say, "Oh, they're messing with things that they shouldn't be messing with, and they're being punished for it." So there's definitely a lot of that as well. But I don't know. I don't really know what it is. I like to think it's just coincidence and not some sort of evil force that's jumping out to movie sets and cursing the cast and crew. But I don't really know.
So the movie comes out. So like I said, it had a budget. It's a 2.8 million budget. Marketing, excuse me, was also 2.8 million. It made $78.7 million worldwide. And Richard Donner said that the film made so much money for Fox that it pretty much enabled the studio to give George Lucas the money he needed to finish Star Wars the way that he wanted. So
Hmm.
that's a pretty interesting. I imagine Richard Donner will be looking at George Lucas saying, "You owe me your career, buddy," afterwards. Um, a couple of interesting things here with the when the film's released. So movies like Jaws and Exorcist, they were based on novels, right? So there's a tie-in there where you can make money from the novel as well. So, but the Omen wasn't. That was like original screenplay. So they had the screenwriter actually do a novelization of his script, and they released the novelization of the script before the film's opening. And then when they had sneak previews, had interest in the novelization, and the novel ended up like selling like heaps of copies. I think it sold like 875,000 copies in like 3 weeks. It became a number one bestseller. And because it's kind of like one feeds the other, the previews feeds the novel feeds the film. It's like a really kind of smart kind of strategy they had there as well. Another cool thing that the producer Harvey Bernhard did was that so they had kind of like the pre-hype advertising campaigns like The Exorcist and Jaws did, and they really wanted to do the same kind of thing. They want to create like a word of mouth publicity. So they have these two sneak previews, and one of them was actually run 6th of June 1976. The other one was 10th of June 1976. And during that time, when people would go in to watch the 6th of June one for especially when they would leave the cinema, they will have all of these the patrons will be shown posters pointing out to the 666 date,
Mm.
6676 date, and people really freaked out about it. So that caused a little bit of a commotion, such and word of mouth. I really love that kind of stuff. It doesn't seem like something that happens a lot kind of these days where they can do some really clever kind of like there's stuff you can do online and such and everything, but these kind of old school kind of ways that they manage to get word of mouth being released and do these kind of really kind of sometimes sketchy but sometimes like inventive ways to get people to really talk about the film. And the biggest way you could do it is to freak them out. And for some people reason, when people get freaked out, it just makes more people want to get freaked out and they go watch these films. I think it's really kind of clever. I really kind of miss those kind of old school tactics.
Yeah, well, Hitchcock did that with Psycho. I mean, when Psycho came out, they had these audio recordings that would play about, if you feel faint, when watching the film, there will be a nurse on hand or something like that. So that was a genius marketing plan that Hitchcock put together. So yeah, they were doing that early on, freaking people out. And people started talking. It's like, oh my God, well, I could faint while watching this movie. It's that scary. And it just made people want to go see it more. And I think The Exorcist had some of that too, where people were just, you had all these stories coming out of people fainting in the theater, and everything. So all that kind of stuff hyped up the movies like crazy. But yeah, we really don't see much of that anymore because I think also we're so desensitized as a society that there's nothing
Mm.
that's really going to freak us out to that point. Back then, people were seeing things that they'd never seen before. They'd never seen anything like, like The Exorcist or Psycho or anything like that. It was like the first time where you're seeing things that were making people faint and freak out and run out of the theater because they'd never, seen anything like that before. Going back even further when film first started becoming popular and you had like these old films of like a train just coming towards the camera, and people in the theater started ducking and running out of the theater because they thought it messed with their minds. They'd never seen a train coming at them in that kind of direction before. And yeah, they go in there knowing that it's not real, but it still plays with your mind. So those earlier horror films in the 60s and 70s were doing the same kind of thing. Now you just can't get away with that anymore. I mean, horror's still popular, people still go. As we see with modern horror films, they're making a ton of money. They're really popular, but they're not really freaking people out to that extent. I mean, I can't remember the last time we heard any report of anybody fainting in a movie theater because it was just too over the top. I mean, I think most people have just seen it all, for the most part. Filmmakers are still creative and they do amazing work, but there's nothing that really impacts the viewers to that extent where they're freaking out or they're having traumatic nightmares afterwards or anything like that. It's that time is sort of past, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I mean, it's just a matter of time before everyone's kind of, gotten over it and they're desensitized.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. I think the last great kind of marketing thing, or the only one that kind of comes to mind, the movie Smile, when before that
Yeah.
came out, and I had people like show up like at baseball games
Yeah,
in
yeah.
prime position, and there's that freaky smile, and they're like, "What the hell is with this person?" The smile and all that. That was a real kind of clever
Hmm.
kind of way, but it doesn't directly tie into the movie, but it became a bit of a kind of viral thing. And I think maybe the best one of all is the Blair Witch. I mean, because the whole thing about the
Yeah.
Blair Witch is like, oh, this is real, and
That's actually the first movie that just came to mind right now. Is the Blair Witch. Yep.
they made the website, they made that fake documentary, because it
Hmm.
was like the inception of like what the internet, would become. And the filmmakers and producers of that movie were clever enough to really tap into the potential of what that will be, where even a sucker like me will watch it and go, oh my God, this is real. And you don't realize afterwards, of
Yeah.
course, you're just being duped. And I think that's just that was really just fantastic as well. But that's the last. I think Blair Witch probably took it, did the best that it could in making that pre-hype stuff work so well
Yeah.
for it. But yeah, but Smile, I think Smile was the last one I could think of that really kind of worked and that kind of stuff.
And
Um,
Smile was kind of like a fun gimmick.
hmm,
It wasn't like a scary type of thing where people were seeing people just smiling randomly at baseball games and saying, "Oh my God, this movie must be terrifying." I don't know if I could see it. It's like, "Oh, that's kind of funny. It's cute," and it was a different type of gimmick. But yeah, I agree with the Blair Witch. I mean, the fact that they kind of pass it off as like a real thing. I mean, found footage films like that just weren't a thing, really. I mean, there's like Cannibal Holocaust and some other stuff, but that's in a totally different category. This was, I mean, when I saw Blair Witch, I thought it was kind of freaky. Um,
yeah.
the very last shot at the end with the guy in the corner, like that kind of spooked me out a bit, or the footage inside of the tent when it's just started, going crazy on the out, like something's about to attack, but you have no idea what it is. And I mean, so there were moments in that movie that were pretty creepy. But yeah, that was probably the one of the few films in recent history that kind of had such a brilliant marketing plan based on just kind of messing with people in that sense. But yeah, it's really hard to pull off in a smart and effective way. So that's why we just don't really see it too often.
Um, I want to talk about the religious reaction to this movie because I think another thing about the 70s is the different kind of like reactions from different religious groups to some of these films. Because a lot of these films are kind of like new territory in regards to a lot of these films were kind of like B grade, grindhouse, trash exploitation cinema, and now it's just taken over the mainstream, right? Everyone
Hmm.
watching it in the metropolitan areas and such. And the reaction to some of the religious groups is really interesting in this film. What I found really interesting is the whole some of the things used in the movie, supposedly from Bible passages. So the opening passage from Book of Revelation, chapter 13, that's real. The whole thing about the number of the beast, which Iron Maiden, of course, we know from the
Hmm.
song Number of the Beast, they use it themselves to really great effect. The other part, though, which isn't real, is totally made up, is the part where he says, when the Jews return to Zion and a comet rips the sky and the Holy Roman Empire rises, then you and I must die. That's total bullshit. That's like the
Hmm.
screenwriter Silzer like making something up there. But a lot of people thought it was like a real kind of like kind of thing there. So different groups had different kind of reactions to it. So the Roman Catholic Church were just really kind of short of condemnation of the whole thing, and I think a lot of it comes down to that last passage I was talking about is that that prophecy sounded more like, kind of like verses by like Nostradamus than anything else, and they found it kind of like really kind of silly and stupid to kind of associate that with like other things in the movie. Funny enough, though, um, if it has to be pointed out that just like The Exorcist, I imagine a lot of these films brought a lot of people back to church. I'm just saying that because and I think the first Omen. I don't know. Did you see the prequel, The First Omen, in regards to the Omen movies?
I didn't see it. I think, and I don't want to speak badly about it because I haven't seen it, but once I started hearing that Damien wasn't born of a jackal, I was like, all right, I'm out. And
It's
I don't know what actually happened in the film, so I don't want to, but I think that just kind of maybe like that was because that was just one of my favorite parts of the original film.
hmm.
And if they didn't kind of bring that back for the prequel, then I couldn't get into it. It's not that I would never watch it. It's just at that time I just didn't really have interest because of just what I was hearing about it. And I could be totally wrong. Could have been a great film. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what I was hearing, but that was just my take at that time.
Having seen it, I was very skeptical myself before watching it. It's actually a really good film. The
Okay.
jackal thing, they play with it a bit. So yes and no. The jackal in the film is not necessarily physical, let's say it that way. It could be
Hmm.
spiritual incarnation of it. I'm just going to say that though. I don't want to give away too much away because I do want you to watch it
Yeah.
and let me know later what you thought of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Because I mean, in the original, like there was a physical jackal. There
yes,
was an actual jack, and that, I mean, for me, that is just so much more effective because it is an actual animal that birthed a human being. And that just, that was awesome for me. So I think if they couldn't kind of just stick with that exact, premise and do it and set up set up the scene that happened in the original Omen, then I'm not too happy about that. But I will check it out though at some point. Um, and I will say just the remake of the Omen that came out some years back. Uh, I was actually not too disappointed with that. I thought they did a pretty decent job. A lot of times when they remake films, they take something that's just so amazing and they try to put their new spin on it and stuff like that. But I also thought it was pretty decent. I enjoyed it.
that was a 2006 movie that came out with
Hmm.
Lee Shriver.
Yeah,
Yes, I haven't seen that one. I really want to watch it because
it's
just
decent.
the
It's worth watching. Yeah.
just the idea of Mia Farrow playing the nanny in that movie, I
Yeah.
think is really kind of like really interesting casting. But I got to
Yeah.
say though, like the first Omen kind of dives into the influence that the church has on all of this kind of stuff and what
Hmm.
I don't want to give away too much once you watch it. So if you can watch it one day, I would recommend it.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
the other end though, so the Catholic Church wasn't so hot on it. On the other end, in 19 there's a 1976 article that says the California Graduate School of Theology in Glendale, California presented a special award to the filmmakers for daringly taking a step into a new type of dramatization of a biblical doctrine. So there's some people that kind of saw it. So I think again it comes to kind of like some sorts of Protestant, maybe Catholic kind of divides and into the whole kind of thing on it. But I do find it kind of interesting about how when people represent maybe biblical passage to be real and it isn't. Just how a lot of people were kind of like buy it hook, line, and sinker through the film, especially the whole kind of like when the whole thing about return and design and all that. It doesn't sound very biblical just in its phrasing, in its tone. They kind of the all that kind of stuff. It very sounds very Hollywood, but it works for the
Hmm.
movie. So that's all that really matters at the end.
Yeah.
Another thing we need to talk about, which we haven't yet, is Jerry Goldsmith, the score he does for this movie, which I think has to be easily what top five best horror scores of all time that
Oh,
he does in this
fantastic.
film.
Yeah.
Um, Really interesting thing about Jerry Goldsmith is that he's done like up to this point like 300 movie and TV scores and what have you. Not once was he kind of like did he win like an Academy Award? He's been nominated a bunch, but I think he's been like overall nominated like 19 times. But his
Hmm.
one win was for The Omen, and he got
Yeah.
nominated twice because he got the original score and he got the original song for the Ave Santani piece in the movie. Which, funny
Hmm.
enough, is the lyrics in aren't English, but they're really bad Latin. So even though they're in Latin, they're like really kind of shaky Latin anyway. But it works for the film, right?
Yeah.
And he supposedly he wasn't going to go to the Oscars. He was like, "Fuck him, I'm not going." I lose every single time. Not going to happen. They're not going to give it one to a horror movie. Forget about it. And Richard Donner was like, "You're coming. You're coming with us. Sit down and watch it. Representing us, all that kind of stuff." And he ends up winning for
Yeah.
the score, which I thought was fantastic. But I recently listened to a I forgot where it was, but I found a video of like a live version of Ave Satani, like a live choir and such. And I think they were it
Hmm.
might have been in like a Colosseum or something in Rome, and that's a freaky song, man. I tell you what.
Yeah.
And I tell you, with I can talk to you especially about this with the intersection between horror and metal. I imagine the score for this movie and stuff like Ava Satani, especially, might have some type of you know influence maybe on some heavy metal musicians. I don't know. I know like guys like Black Sabbath and such. They started off their band because they love horror movies, and there's other guys like
Hmm.
Rob Zombie and such. I imagine Omen has to be one of those films that maybe some of these guys were influenced by, especially that score because it's such a doom-laden kind of
Yeah.
just serious score throughout the whole movie. I just thought it was just a fantastic work here by Jerry Goldsmith in this film.
I think it's probably worth investigating to see how many metal artists have used that music,
Hmm.
either in the backgrounds of their songs or to open some of their songs. I mean, I'm sure it's been done. I'm actually when later on tonight, I'll probably dig into YouTube and see if see if there's some videos of that, but I'm sure there are. But I mean, I've had that music stuck in my head probably for the last 45 years. I mean, it's just, you know, for whatever, I don't know why. I just like I'll just be driving down the street or something like that, and all of a sudden it just pops into my head. And that is just that's just that's incredible when someone can create a piece of music that has that kind of effect on people, and it's just unforgettable. I mean, once you hear it, it's like you'll never forget it. And first of all, the film was fantastic, but to have that kind of score behind it, it just makes it, just I don't know. I don't even have words for it, but yeah, every now and then, for no particular reason, that track will come into my head,
Yeah.
even like the first and second Omen movies had just incredible soundtracks, and just the sound design and everything like that. I never forget it, and I think about it more often than I'm comfortable with. I think I don't really know why it pops into my head, but yeah, and I'm sure tonight I'll be thinking about it quite a bit. But so effective, so original, and it stands out. Once you hear that, like where it came from, and that's just a great job that was done on that.
Let's just talk about the franchise for a bit as a whole. So you have a sequel, Damien Omen 2, 1978. You had The Final Conflict that starred Sam Neill, 1981. You had a fourth movie, which was like a straight from TV movie called Omen 4, The Awakening, which I haven't seen because supposedly it's just total trash, so I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
You had the 2006 The Omen remake. We just spoke about that. You had a TV show called Damien in 2016, which I had no idea about whatsoever. That came out as well. I don't think it lasted very long though. And then, of course, you had the first Omen, which came out a few years ago as well. I really liked the second movie because it's really interesting to see how the character Damien as he's kind of developing as a young as a boy to a man going through teenage the whole kind of thing teenage being a teenager and puberty and everything else he's starting to learn how to control the methods of manipulating the things around him. It's no longer just being a witness and seeing kind of like the forces do the work for him. He's now projecting
Hmm.
things. He's now using the crow to go after the guy's face. He's now doing all this stuff. He's very much kind of like in that vein. Final Conflict I haven't got a chance to see. I did see the ending though, which was very interesting in how Christ comes down and they have a bit of a convo and Damien gets killed and I thought that was very interesting. But the second movie I think was a really, really strong sequel.
I love the second one. And I mean, probably at least as much as the first. I remember seeing that when I was a little bit older, I started really getting into horror, like really paying attention to it and renting them, renting horror films every single week at the local video store. And The Omen 2 was a movie that had a big effect on me too because it was just the atmosphere was just so bleak. It was
Mm.
just it was cloudy. It was just the scenes where the woman's getting attacked by the crow on the side of the road and stuff like that. Just the whole atmosphere, the music in that scene was also again incredible. Um, but just the feel of it is just like this kind of like a just a gross feeling. Like you just feel like there's just so much evil around and everything. And that yeah, to see Damien kind of just in that transition point where like he kills his brother in just sort of like this passionate moment in the middle of the woods. They're just alone and his brother's just walking away and he's kind of Damien feels rejected and he just kind of loses control and kills his brother just in the heat of the moment and then afterwards has regret, like extreme regret for doing so. So there's still so it's an interesting kind of he's an interesting character in this one because yeah, he is pure evil, but at the same time he's conflicted because there is a side of him that has love for other people, and he did love his brother, even though he struck him down the way he did. And to see him have regret was interesting. Um, but then ultimately, he learns to just kind of deal with it and become an evil being. And then, of course, in the third one, like he knows who he is at that point, and now he's got this big plan going. It wasn't the third one wasn't my favorite of the first three. I thought he was okay. I mean, I love Sam Neill. I think he's an amazing actor. I like him in everything he does. The film itself was fine. I mean, I thought it was okay. I wasn't just there was nothing just amazing about it. Um, but I know I interviewed a corpse grinder from Cannibal Corpse in my film, and his favorite scene is that scene where Damien goes into the room and there's the statue of Christ and he puts his hands on the crown and it starts bleeding and stuff like that. And corpse grinder says, it's like I forget what the line was. Let man see the rapture of I forgot what it was, something about the rapture of my kingdom or whatever. And he loved that line so much that he just wanted Damien to win and take over the world because like he was so amazing and so awesome. So yeah, of course, there is like a heavy metal influence with the films overall. And Zetro from Exodus also talked about the first Omen in my film, and that's one of his favorite movies and everything. So, just kind of going back into like the heavy metal thing is like Doman is huge for metal artists. But yeah, the third one was decent. It was okay. The fourth one I saw when it came out on TV. Definitely not one of my favorites.
Seems like
There
just
was
bit of a cash in kind of thing, right?
it's just there was no reason for it. There was like a different character. I think it was I forgot Damien's daughter or something. I don't even remember, but I do remember there was one creepy scene in that movie that's worth looking at, and you could probably find it on YouTube. But there was a scene where there's a guy, I don't remember like who the character was, but he was obviously like kind of a roadblock, and needed to be kind of taken out. And he's looking in this little shop window, and they have these little, trinkets and things, and there's like a little nativity scene that he looks at. And it looks like a typical nativity scene. It's small, little like porcelain characters or something like that. It looks a little bit closer, and the music starts ramping up and everything. And he looks a little bit closer, and all of a sudden, like the baby Jesus just becomes kind of like this rotted form of itself. It looks really creepy, and just that with a combination of the music and everything. And then I think he got smashed by a wrecking ball that was doing construction on the street at that time, and that was like his death scene. That scene alone is worth watching. I think that was a really effective moment. The rest of the film is kind of a throwaway, unfortunately. But I would definitely recommend anyone, who's curious, go watch that one scene. At least from what I remembered, I haven't seen it in years. I just remember watching the whole thing, not impressed, but that one scene was very, very cool. And then, of course, like we said, the remake, 2006, I enjoyed it. I thought it was well done. I think it respected the original version. It wasn't trying to be something totally different. It was just sort of a retelling with modern filmmaking and current actors and everything. And the prequel, haven't seen yet, but it's on the list now, so I will go check it out.
I did enjoy it because like I was incredibly skeptical going into it. I really was. I thought it was really well done. Yeah, the conclusions of it, it isn't a pure prequel in regards to it being a film to the Omen. I think it's setting up. It's a first chapter of a new franchise, I think, and I'm
Hmm.
very interested to see what it does, if it does anything moving forward. There hasn't been any news of any type of sequel or anything. I mean, it made 54 million on a $30 million budget. I don't know whether that's enough for a sequel to move forward. But if I'm just looking at it as just like a new version of a Omen kind of like a franchise,
Hmm.
I thought it was incredibly, really, really well done, really creepy, really well done stuff in here. So worth checking out. And
Yeah,
for
and
everyone
I
out
think and
there, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, a lot of the studios are being very cautious now, I think, because of what happened with The Exorcist, when they tried
Hmm.
to reboot that series. I think it didn't do as well as they had hoped. The reaction wasn't great, and I think they had several more films planned, but then once that last one kind of tanked and pissed off a lot of people, a lot of the fans, they were like, all right, and I think the director bailed and it just kind of fell apart. So they all want to make money. They all want to bring back popular films and everything like that, and start a whole new thing, a new Halloween series, a new this and that. But uh, but yeah, it can get very sloppy if you're not really paying respect to the originals, and the fans are going to be the most critical. They know what's what. They know what
Hmm.
they like. They know what made the original Omen one of the greatest horror films of all time. What made the original Exorcist one of the greatest horror films of all time. And then once you start trying to just doing these cash grab, type things where it's like, oh, we're gonna make another three movies and throw a bunch of money at it and we'll make billions of dollars and it'll be fantastic. Once you just kind of lose track of what made the original so fantastic and you're just kind of looking at, making money, which I mean the studio, that's their business, that's what they do. But when you lose the art of it and just sort of everything that made those films so great, it's kind of pointless. It better just keep the money, and talk to the fans and the directors who really appreciate the originals and say, okay, how can we do this in a way that's respectful and not gonna piss everybody off? And I think after The Exorcist, like the last one, they're probably cautious. So maybe with The Omen, maybe they some of the studios wanted to do some more. Maybe they're still planning on it, but I think now they're being a little cautious.
I think they may be waiting to see what the Mike Flanagan Exorcist turns out to be next year,
Yeah.
because what he's been talking about is that it's going to be like a whole new thing that's respectful of the other stuff. But he's saying that The Exorcist 3 is a bigger influence on what he's doing with this film than the first one. And I
Mm.
absolutely love The Exorcist Part
Third
3. I
one
think
was
it's one
great. Yeah.
fantastic film. So I think maybe much like the original Omen, The Exorcist again franchise again is going to set the tone to see what happens with going forward. I mean, if that film does well, then maybe Fox looks back at Omen and say, "Hey, we made this first one, people liked it. Maybe we could continue on with the second one." Could be a
Yeah.
possibility. Who knows? We'll see what happens when that happens next year. In the
Hmm.
meantime, excuse me. In the meantime, for everyone out there listening, The Omen, 50 years. If you haven't seen it yet, we highly recommend you do it. It's one of the highest influential horror movies of all time for a reason. It really is. I think a lot of things that elements in this movie has it's just got its fingers in a lot of elements in a lot of kind of like things, all horror filmmaking and just horror content in general. And for everyone out there listening, please do check out Through Static and Shadows, the YouTube series. I've got the show notes in the link, and also check out as well the history of metal and horror, one of my favorite documentaries, because I love metal and horror. So, once they come together, what's not to love, right? It's like having cheese and tomato sauce on a dough. It's a pizza right there. It's a pizza of a documentary. That's how you go. You put that on the sleeve. It's a pizza of a documentary because it works
There
so
you
well.
go.
Again, Mike, I thank you so very much for your time today. Thanks for talking all thing Omen, and best of luck in regards to Through Static and Shadows. I hope everything goes well with it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, it's great talking about the Omen. It's always fun to talk about things that we're passionate about, or things that I grew up with. And yeah, so again, thanks for having me out to talk about that, and talking about the new show and all the other stuff. So hopefully we get to do it again.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.